So, Terry, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are and where, how did you become who you are today?
Sure. Okay, so right now I'm working for a company called Atreides, and I guess I'll start with my job title. I'll maybe work backwards from there. So yeah, I'm the senior director for customer success, and so that means I'm responsible for making sure customers actually can use the data that we provide. That's, it's working with big data in the intelligence kind of sphere, essentially. But I started out, and I suppose, I've worked in both government and private sector, so I've got a mixed career of doing different things, and I've done a lot of training delivery over the years in terms of intelligence training, especially open source intelligence. And varied experience working in different types of organizations, large companies, small companies. Right now the company I'm working for is progressing from being a startup to scaling up. But I've worked for larger organizations, so and in government too.
So you mentioned that you have done some training, and what is your when you were in, and if you can talk about this, what type of training did you receive?
I guess when I started out in my career, a lot of those techniques hadn't yet really filtered through from, say, the US, where they were kind of a lot of that stuff was originated and being developed. And so that was not really a big part of the training curriculum at that point. It was much more probably specific training around, how to deal with different types of information and, what the outputs need to look like. Very, very kind of practical training around how to present your findings, how to present and how to work with, and like I said, how to work with different information, different types of people as well, how to coordinate and pull things together. So yeah, I'd say less so on the analysis side and more so on the kind of practical elements of just, day-to-day work in the role that I was in. But yeah, the structured analytical techniques and those kinds of things I really came across more once I left government. Because I think, so I left in 2008 and went into the private sector. And that was a point in time when a couple of different things were happening. So open source intelligence was becoming a much bigger thing. When I was in my government role, I didn't really use open source information, to be honest. And so I wasn't really that familiar with it, probably didn't hold it in particularly high regard, thinking that, well, there's nothing that's going to be openly available that will really tell me anything that I can't get from more sensitive sources. And
How
so
wrong you were.
Right. But then you sort of, you come out into the private sector and you realize actually there's a wealth of information out there. And also at that point in time, it was just as social media was becoming a bigger thing and commercial satellite imagery, the quality of that suddenly was improving. So you had these types of information and data that we could use that that hadn't been there before. And so that was suddenly playing a bigger role. And so yeah, in 2008, I was in the private sector. By 2009, I was sort of first getting into delivering training and working on delivery of training programs for open source intelligence. And I'd been through some open source intelligence training before I'd left government, and so I kind of knew some of the basics, but actually applying them was, this was the first time I was really applying a lot of that stuff and learning as I went and figuring out new things. And it was also at the time, I think, just when, especially in the UK, so I was given responsibility in my role at that time. I was working for a company called Jane's, and so my role, part of it involved delivering training programs. And one of the questions that was coming back to us from government customers in Europe, UK and Europe more broadly, was, we hear a lot about structured analytical techniques. Do you guys have any training you could deliver in these techniques? And so I'd kind of heard of them, but hadn't really got used to working with them. And so I went away and learned about them and then started to apply them to my work. And from that, developed training courses and these were like not necessarily theoretical. These weren't really theoretical training courses. They were designed to be practical workshops where you really wanted to get people stuck into using the techniques. But of course, there's a fair bit of theory that can go with them. And so you end up, I think learning a lot of the theory, and I probably spent at that point in time too much time talking about the theory, because I became quite passionate about it. I became really interested in intelligence analysis and how do we do it? How do we, and how do we understand the world around us, essentially? And so it wasn't really specific to intelligence. It was more relating to knowledge work generally, I guess. And for me, it was kind of really interesting thinking about, okay, how can we improve the way we do what we do in whatever kind of intelligence we're working in? And that was what was fascinating. And that's what I wanted to pass on in the teaching as well, was to say to people, hey, you know what? You may not have thought about some of these techniques, or you may not have thought about some of the challenges that these techniques actually address. But if you do, you might find you improve your performance.
Yeah. I think I'm not sure if I fell into the whole theory part, but I fell in love at least with SATs as well when I got out. I learned a lot and worked with it on the inside, but when I got out, I actually wanted to learn more and apply it. And bless my boss, I got hired at my current day job, the Nordic Financial Cert, and I asked for one of the first days, what is it you want me to do? And he was like, I don't know. Figure it out. You're the expert. How can we apply and how can we, do more of what you know? I'm like, poof, okay. So I spent a year, treading water and trying to figure out what it is I was supposed to do, right, and apply it. But that also got me into the whole. I understood after a while that the community in cyber, specifically cyber threat intelligence, they were talking the talk, but not walking the walk. They talked about intelligence as if they knew what they were doing. But basically, they were just peddling data and information and calling it intelligence. And that sort of messed with my mind a little bit. So I'm like, okay, we have something to do here, and that got me into the whole. Let's help them to understand it better. How can we use critical thinking, structured analytical techniques, intelligence methodology, intelligence cycle? How can we apply this into cyber? So I got a lot of pushback in the beginning. We know what to do and everything, but as courses like SANS, the CTI, the FOR 578, also applies intelligence and analysis of competing hypotheses and stuff. So it is getting out there, but it's really slow burning, So I also try to sort of teach and spread the gospel, if you will. But it's
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was an interesting time to be doing it, because I found that more and more people were so I was working almost exclusively with like government customers in terms of training that I was delivering. And, I used to, when people asked what I did, I used to say, well, at the time I was delivering a lot of open source intelligence training and all around the world. So I just used to tell people, well, I travel around the world teaching people how to use Google. And that was kind of a large part of it. But at the same time, the analysis side of it was where it was really important. So at the time, we were also working with a partner his focus really was on all of the information collection side of things. The role that I and my team had was to develop and kind of add to that the analysis side, because we didn't want training and a lot of open source intelligence training back then, maybe less so now, but certainly back then was very focused just on the information collection. And it's almost like the process stops there. It's kind of like it's all just about getting more and more information, and without really thinking about, okay, what are you going to do with all this information? You as an analyst, or you as an analyst team, how are you going to use it? How are you going to draw insight from it, answer questions and provide conclusions? And, ultimately decision support is what you're producing intelligence for. Somebody's going to make a decision somewhere, and you want to help them be as informed as possible. Despite all of the problems and challenges we have with intelligence, in any type of intelligence. But so we were kind of commissioned almost to bring in that analytical training and say, okay, this is what you do with the information once you've got it. But what we realized was it's not just about the techniques being applied once you have information. It's about, you've got to plan for that. Like if you're gonna use ACH or another structured analytical technique as part of your process to reach a conclusion, you've got to think about that at the outset, because then if you set that up initially and then you collect information and feed it into that process, it will make your life a lot easier than doing it later on, once you've gone out and collected a bunch of information and then started to think about, right, what are we actually going to use this for?
Yeah, Arno Rooser in Netherlands, one of these guys who teach open
So
source.
he was the partner I worked with.
Yeah. And he had, I giggled and laughed, and he wrote like an example of what happened in one of his courses. He said, he asked a question, and he deliberately just asked a question. Then the students would just throw themselves at Google and start working, right? After 5, 6, 7 minutes, he would like, stop. What are you doing? And, we're collecting. On what? For whom? For what reason? Why did you go there rather than there? Why didn't you stop and think, do a little short analysis of what you need to do, for what reason, for what purpose, what are you going to do, what's the end product, for whom? That's going to help you focus so much more and save a lot of time over time, right? So spend time to save time. And I was like, yes, preach it, brother. and it's amazing when you see some of these guys. Your old partner, obviously. I think it's interesting sometimes where students do these things, right? And in cyber, this is what happens all the time. They get a problem, they start Googling, downloading the internet, boiling the ocean, and try to figure out what to do with it rather than focusing a little bit more on what's the end product, for whom, what is it, what does support look like in terms of what decisions, etc. Then you could tailor your product. That means, I only have half a page. I only have 5 minutes. Do I need to spend 13 hours on this or 3 days? Maybe you should boil it down to something more tangible, quicker, easier, but still rigid, also following intelligence standards. So
I think that what people would often do, and the scenario you described there is exactly what happens often, is that people will get a question, they'll get a requirement, and they'll immediately start diving into searching for the information. And I don't know whether it's partly driven because people, we almost, I don't know whether it's human nature, but we almost want to find the perfect answer straight away. And a piece of information that just gives you your answer. Or there's this kind of maximalist kind of approach people have where they want to find all of the information that could possibly be relevant to their research question. And what you almost have to move them away from, and this is what I spent a long time talking to people about and trying to teach, was that no, sometimes what you really need, especially when you're not doing academic research, you're doing the research you're doing for the intelligence requirement you've got is generally going to be up against the deadline, and it's going to be pretty short, and it's going to be too short to assess all of the information that's out there. So you've got to be very choosy. You've got to pick your sources carefully. You've got to allocate your time wisely when you're going out and gathering the information, because you're going to still have to analyze it and produce something off the back of that information. And so my approach to it was always to say to people, right, what's the minimum information you need to answer that question? And which kind of sources will give you the clearest level of information that is appropriate to the question? Don't go out and get tons of information that you would need weeks to go through if you've only got a day to answer your question. And something that a question that would often come up whenever we were teaching structured analytical techniques or even the basic process of saying to people, right, before you start searching, give yourself time to make a plan. And I used to work with analysts as part of the company I worked in at the time, whose daily role was producing analysis reports, daily analysis reports, and they were country analysts, so they would cover a bunch of different countries. And each morning they would get in at 8 a.m. By midday, they would have had to have produced 2 or 3 short reports about what's going on in their countries that they're interested in. So they've only got like 4 hours to produce something, like some useful content that's going to go out to customers, not just to others within the company. So it's got to be really good. And it's got to provide some insight. It's got to be interesting and informative. And they would say to me, look, I've only got 4 hours. I don't have time to sort of do what you're recommending, because what you're recommending is going to slow down my process. If I stop and start planning, it's going to take me more time. And it would be a real difficulty convincing them that actually, no, once you get in the habit of doing this, your planning might only take you 5-10 minutes.
Right.
And then the rest of the time you will actually save that back because you'll be more efficient and effective in going out and gathering your information. It's a hard sell. People,
and I see this in cyber as well, right? Oh, we don't have time, or because the building's on fire, we can't do all these things. I'm like, take 5 minutes to focus your efforts.
Yeah,
that will save a lot of wasted time afterwards, right?
Yeah,
But I think the two of us are like the old people on the peanut gallery, like, "Hey, you should do these things," and our kids downstairs are like,
so
"Well,
this
don't
is,
listen to the old guys.
yeah. I mean, this is the funny thing, I guess, because I still fall foul of this myself.
Yeah.
I'll get a question and I'll think, yeah, I think I can pretty much answer that quickly. And I'll just go straight into searching. And then I'll be like 10 minutes into searching for information. I'll be like, wait a second. I've already gone down a rabbit hole and I've got to get myself back out and, give myself a plan.
Yeah, like 17 pages deep in Wikipedia with some referencing here and there. Oh, that's interesting. Didn't help me a bit, but it's interesting. So you were in the government side. You decided to go out in the private sector. What made that happen? I mean, something happens that makes people go out of the private sector, into the private sector?
I think for me it was probably a few different things at the time. Partly, I think the world of government intelligence can feel a little bit claustrophobic, and if it's kind of the first job you've gone into, like your career has started there, I don't know. I had this curiosity of like, what else is out there in the world? What else am I not seeing? And I think it's to do with that curiosity leads you to want to have the best information to understand the world. And initially, probably you go into government thinking, well, government agencies will have the best information. They're going to know everything. Surely they must do. I've seen the movies, right? These guys have got everything.
I had the same
right?
thing.
Yeah. And you get in there and you're like, oh, actually, no, they're very specifically focused on the stuff they need to be focused on. And they, and
as they should,
as
right?
they should,
there
as they
are
should,
certain
absolutely.
things they really need to focus on, and that's fine.
Absolutely,
but there's so much more and tools and options and abilities that we can exploit.
That's just it. And for me, it was a case of thinking, I think there's more out there that we're missing, that we're not necessarily grasping, because we're dealing with almost like the consequences of issues that are arising from other types of problems, and I want to delve into what those other problems might be and figure out, okay, should this really be a counterterrorism problem, or should this be a development problem, right? Or should it be something else? Is there a political thing here? This is not an issue for the military to solve. It's an issue for politicians to solve, or something like that,
Yeah.
And so I was kind of like, there were all these different drivers at the time, and I think probably especially in the wake of like the Iraq War as well, and thinking, I'm not sold entirely on the mission right now, and so. Deciding, okay, let's see what else is out there. And it was purely curiosity, really, that led me to look at opportunities elsewhere. And I found a role that I thought would be good. And I went into it, and you kind of take a different path, right? So
absolutely. And you already touched upon it, right? So there is some sort of maturity level, and skill sets in the government side. When you got into the private sector, what do you think is the maturity level, if you will, in applying intelligence in private sector?
So I think there's a couple of things. I think as well as the maturity level, I'll answer that first, and I'll go on to a more contextual comment, I suppose. In terms of the maturity level, there really was none when I got out into the private sector. There was no.
In which year?
In 2008.
Yeah, right.
So there were maybe a few people who'd left government or military intelligence or law enforcement and gone into private sector roles, and they had an idea of how to do stuff. But I found a lot of it was what was happening was people were taking methods that they'd learned in government agencies, or people in those private sector roles were learning about methods that were applied in government agencies and thinking, okay, this is the way we need to do intelligence. And I came in thinking, okay, why are you restricting yourself to doing it just the way that those guys do it? Because they have to do it in a certain way because of who they are.
And mandates and rules and regulations.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. But as a private sector entity, we can do things differently. So, for example, the company I joined, Jane's, was an interesting place to be because they had a combination of people, analysts who were doing a lot of in-depth research and producing analysis on a variety of military topics. They also had journalists who were writing stuff in magazines that would be published. And when you looked at the actual skill sets of, say, people working in my area of the business where we were doing consulting essentially, but really it was kind of bespoke research for government customers or industry customers, but that was very much more in that kind of intelligence mold, because it's not something we're going to go out and publish. It's very much specific for this customer addressing a specific requirement. Versus the journalists who are going out interviewing people publishing his stuff in magazines, the skill sets actually were fairly similar. And you kind of thought, okay, well, why do we need to do things in an intelligence way when we're a private sector organization and we publish things anyway? We could take advantage of some of the journalistic skills as well. And it was almost like what I had in mind was kind of what Bellingcat went and did, right? And where they've kind of done open source intelligence in a different way. And when I talk to them and I say, look, this isn't really kind of open source intelligence. And you know, I talked to Elliot Higgins and he agreed. He was like, well, yeah, what we're doing is open source investigative journalism. And it's kind of a different thing, but it means that they can be open, they can be public, they can crowdsource information, they can have people send them stuff, which you can't do if you're working in intelligence or you're part of an intelligence organization in the same way, you know, that journalists can do that. So that was kind of fascinating, seeing the maturity level wasn't the same, but at the same time, people were trying to adopt those techniques and become more mature in those techniques and methods. And I was kind of arguing, actually, you don't need to do that. You can develop a different way of doing things that is more appropriate to private sector organizations. And that was kind of, where we were at the time. But the other thing I wanted to comment on was that I was slightly naive when I went into the private sector. I thought a private sector organization, that especially one that's, you know, it's run for profit, it's got to be very efficient in the way it does things.
Oh, you had an assumption.
Yes, I had an assumption. I had a big assumption, yeah. It's got to be more efficient than government, where things that can kind of get bound up in bureaucracy and move very slowly and all this kind of stuff. And I realized that, you know, the company I was part of was owned by a bigger parent company, and it was thousands and thousands of people around the globe. I realized it's not a private versus public sector issue. It's just a big organization issue. Mm-hmm. You know, that's how bureaucracy occurs. It's a function of how do you organize a lot of people around a series of massive tasks that they've got to complete or whatever. And so, I was kind of naive about the sort of human dynamics, I suppose, that can often lead to some of the inefficiencies you get in the way that people and organizations work, thinking that there wouldn't be any of that in the private sector. And actually, it was probably even worse. Like, so that's where the maturity level was also lower, because, you know, some of the stuff we were trying to do, it would involve developing new processes. We needed processes for things, operational stuff that the company hadn't done before. So you're having to do things from scratch. Whereas in government, those organizations have existed, especially in the UK, for a long time. You know, the Ministry of Defence has been here a long time. The Foreign Office has been around for a long time. Processes are pretty ingrained. Right? They kind of know how to do what they're doing. And so they have certain amount of efficiency from that, even though they're big bureaucracies. Yeah, which you don't necessarily get in the private sector, where you're kind of reinventing the wheel sometimes, or you know, kind of making things up as you go.
I came into the private sector a couple of years later than you, of course, and even then we had issues where head of a cyber defense center said, you know, I get people from the, you know, army or whatever intelligence agency, they come in and they try to apply the intelligence methodology from an intelligence agency, and we should change how we operate the bank. And they're like, no, you can't do that. What we have to do is you have to adjust your way of thinking and adapt to the new world you're coming into. And he said that most of the people that he hired from from the Intel part, they weren't able to sort of switch their mindset. And I think that was a really interesting thing, because I thought my assumption was that we're trained professionals, you know, we know how to do critical thinking. We understand that this situation needs a different approach. But, you know, you revert to your level of training, right? If you know everything about, let's say, Russia, or let's say about China, or whatever the topic is, you have a tendency to lean on it because that's what you know. And when you get into the private sector, you don't know how the private sector operates, or what runs a business, and what the core essence that you're protecting is. And if you don't set off time to understand those things, I think you fall into the whole, I'll do what I've always done and try to apply the government way of doing stuff, and that doesn't work. You know, in the private sector.
I mean, one thing I would say though is that what I have found in the private sector is that you will often work with a more diverse group of people. So, like by function, working in the UK government, you're only working with other British nationals. Going out to the private sector, it's much more multinational. So
Right,
you're
yeah.
sort of exposed to more viewpoints, perspectives, etc. People from different backgrounds, which is great. But one of the things that was harder in some ways is that you're then often working with analysts who are untrained or have not had the same training that you've gone through.
Yeah.
And you start to then appreciate some of that training more because you think, okay, that did at least give us a common way of doing things and kind of not necessarily shortcuts, but quick ways of explaining things to each other that you'd all quickly get on the same page and you could then progress faster. Whereas, and you have that idea that there are frameworks that you can apply. I find sometimes with analysts that haven't been trained, maybe just are, subject matter experts in a particular area. And so they come in and they're hired to, obviously produce analysis on that topic and that area. That's great. They've got a lot of in-depth knowledge, but they don't always know how to apply some of the same frameworks or that they would benefit from doing it. Is often not, that's something they would necessarily understand. And that comes through in things like the way that they will communicate and work with others in a team, and also the way that they'll communicate their findings, which is, both of those things are really important skills in intelligence.
Yeah, I agree. And I see that people who come from traditional intelligence training, when I meet them and I work with them, we focus on the problem, pretty quickly because we know what to do. When I have untrained people or people who haven't gone through the regular training, as you just said, it takes a little while to sort of get them into the right mindset of thinking through problems and how to be critical, identifying your own or the team's biases. What should we focus on to avoid falling into intuitive traps? All those basic, to me, tools that we use, right? So it's it is a challenging but also interesting, because then you can also have that a little, let's see if we can sort of push them a little bit closer to doing this automatically next time. But it's a slow moving process.
Yeah, and I think the other challenge as well is with the private sector is that there's often not the same emphasis on training of staff coming through. Like you said, with the government, you might come in and you might do 6 months of training to start off with. I don't know any private sector organisation that will do that.
No.
It might be a week, or if someone's lucky.
Yeah.
The rest is learnt on the job quite often. And I think there needs to be more structure probably applied to that within the private sector to really get full value out of the work that's being done under the banner of intelligence or, analysis generally.
I travel a little bit around Northern Europe and do teaching, and I see that even in government sector that not everyone does that too, right? They hire people and they start working rather than going through the whole. They should have got 3 to 6 months of good training to be good analysts. But then, they hire someone like me to come in and teach them. Yes, they get 3 weeks of training, but what about the rest? How about learning how they do stuff in the organization? How can I take what I learned from me to apply it further? And then they get back to the office and then learn, I learned some cool stuff, and the rest of the team go, cool, luck with that. And then everyone just does what they want. But with the common training I'm used to, then everyone did the same thing. So when I got into the office I was working in, everyone was doing the same thing. We just continued using the same methodology because we understood. And I think there's some value to it. But then, in private sector, it's more about efficiency. But now we're getting into, well, if we spent a little time in the beginning, we can get much more efficient what to do here. Have you been part of implementing intelligence methodology in some of the jobs you've had in the private sector?
Yeah, so I guess this is probably the funny thing. A lot of the time that I was delivering training to customers who would pay a lot of money for the training, to be honest, and hopefully they found it valuable and useful. Certainly we had customers who came back year after year, so I think they did. But a lot of that same training was not applied internally within the same company that I worked in. So,
and that's interesting, right?
It's bizarre. Yeah, really. You would think that they would sort of accept the benefit of that type of training and actually think, let's build a structured training program internally. And it wasn't really until years after we'd been doing this for years, and then eventually they were like, maybe we should capture some of that training and apply it internally and think about how to use it more. But even then, there was no real program of saying, right, when somebody joins, they're going to go through this, this, and this training course. And then we're going to focus not just on their intelligence skills, but on how they work together and collaboratively do intelligence.
Yeah.
So I found also the same almost when going into private sector organizations to deliver training to them. They would often approach it from the perspective of, this is a problem of people's individual skills. Let's upskill the people and then the performance will improve. And actually, it was often not the case at all. Usually, the individuals that I was training, I would often find, actually, these are pretty smart people. They're pretty good already. Like, they know what they're doing. I'm giving them some, a bit of advice here or some frameworks that will help them. But actually, their biggest problems are not the individual skills. It's the organizational setup. And so, like, there was one occasion. So I left Jane's at one point in 2011, and so I was freelancing for a few years. And I was delivering some freelance training with another colleague to an organization in Europe. And we were there in the room, and I thought we were there to deliver some training. And what we ended up doing was delivering a week of management consulting, essentially, and getting them to reorient how two different teams worked together and the processes that they applied and how they shared information and knowledge. And that was far more beneficial and valuable for them than just focusing on their individual skills. Because intelligence exists in a context, and if the context isn't right, then it's kind of effort for nothing, really.
Yeah.
And so that's I think the major problem I've identified in working with private sector organizations generally is that they don't have that same understanding of the benefits of intelligence to be able to make it a structural part of what they do. It's almost like it's an add-on. And a little bit of an afterthought, and it's treated as an isolated kind of thing almost.
What do you think the reason for that is? Is it, you said structure, but who sets the structure? Is it the team? Is it the manager? Is it, who should be involved to get that actually applied?
Yeah, I think it's got to be something that's accepted at the top level of the organization to say, look, we're an organization, as many, many organizations are, that deals with information in whatever way it is, right? And we need to make decisions on the back of the information we've got. Let's think about how do we manage that information better, and how do we get the people who are working with the information to be able to see the insights in it and produce insights from it to pass up the chain.
Yeah.
So it's got to be done from the top, and it's got to be accepted that, okay, this is going to take potentially some restructuring. It's going to take new ways of doing things, which you need to think then about change management and how you bring that in, and as well as training for the individuals who are doing the intelligence work. But I think it's also part of a wider challenge in that. So when I came into the private sector, it was in some ways the wrong time to come into the private sector. 2008, and it was just months before the global financial crisis happened.
Yeah.
And so what happened was, as an organization that was trying to sell stuff into both government and private sector companies in terms of intelligence, either intelligence support, so doing it for them, or training them to do it themselves, it was a tough environment because all of a sudden people didn't have money. And, organizations didn't have money and budgets were being cut and all this kind of stuff. And I feel like intelligence was one of the things that a lot of organizations thought they could almost do without. And I think now we're at a really interesting point in time again, when geopolitics right now is becoming very unpredictable. And now organizations are probably finding, we really ought to have better intelligence about what's going on around us in the world and our sector, etc. But they don't have the structures in place. And so they're having to probably start from scratch or bring in something, but it's not quite the right fit or whatever. And so now it strikes me there's a lot of demand, but will people rush to failure, or will they actually take time to do things properly in a way that then they can carry on doing it further down the line?
Yeah, that's true. We saw, at least in my day job with NFCert, is that when the war started, so when I say the war, I mean Russia invading Ukraine, the need for geopolitical information about that conflict, about China and Taiwan, about the Middle East, all of those three created a need, and the organizations were asking their cyber analysts about tanks and the border, about why some nation will want, so why Russia did what they did, or why China wants Taiwan. And I was like, these are cyber analysts, they're not intelligence analysts. And they were like, well, this is a list of all the, this is a log analysis, a malware analysis, that's what I can do. So there was a mismatch of what the organization were expecting and asking people internally that actually had no foundation to actually start answering those questions. That created an interesting situation where I had to, at least in our organization, I had 240 organizations, I had to sort of put on my outdoor voice, we say in Norwegian, and say, listen, guys, you're asking cyber people to talk about geopolitics. You probably should change that about the cyber realm rather than how many tanks or, when will Russia invade type of thing. So it created an interesting situation or multiple situations.
Are you finding there's a direct link, though, in terms of the geopolitics?
Yes,
and
there's
the cyber
an increase in
threats?
question. And there are two parts to this. There's an increase in question from more parts of the organization about external factors where geopolitics and cyber are part of it. And there's always also, there has been a link in conflict. So DDoS attacks, so hacktivism has gone through the roof. Before the invasion, we had the hacktivists, but it was anonymous in 2018, 2019, and they dropped off the map. And then suddenly the war came, and then we had an explosion of multiple groups doing hacktivism. There was a direct connection. And also we saw a huge uproar in the cyber threat landscape where different groups had Russian and Ukrainians a part of and being in the same group. So they were tripping over themselves to dox each other and, do a lot of things and the groups broke up. So instead of having like 10 groups we followed, suddenly we had 30. But over a year and a half, they consolidated and created smaller numbers but bigger groups again, where they collaborated.
Yeah.
So now we're into a stable threat landscape.
Okay.
That's at least what we see, and of course,
Really yeah. But the two can't really be separated, right? The geopolitics and the cyber threats.
No, not in this world. I mean, before the war, it was like, yes, there were some activities, and yes, we can see that some groups were not targeting certain countries because of their connection with, or if they were afraid of being sort of targeted or something by the government they were living in. But now it's like, they don't follow the same rules, or almost at least. Now Ukraine, of course, is an enemy and not a friend for them. I mean, we have to jump into artificial intelligence. So from your perspective, what do you think are the benefits of using AI these days? And by AI, I have to say that all the people I talk to me, AI is sort of machine learning, and that's a subset of AI. And then you have LLMs, large language models, which is an even smaller subset of AI. But most people, when we say AI these days, actually think LLMs.
True.
You can choose whatever you want, but be clear when you talk about AI, or you talk about machine learning, LLMs, before we dive into.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I think in terms of AI, I've seen the most impact, I suppose, up to now coming from the LLMs. And so that's really been the focus of investigating kind of what are their capabilities, what can they do, how can they help. And I can see how they can be helpful in some ways where, for example, in the world of open source intelligence or private sector intelligence, where analysts may need skills like programming or coding, but they might not be professional programmers or coders. And these tools that we have now can help them write code to address specific issues or tackle specific problems they have in terms of either going out and collecting data or analyzing data they've got or information they've got, and summarizing it, giving them these kinds of basic things, or creating code that will help them build applications to do more sophisticated things. that's where the current benefits are. But I'm sure those tools are going to develop. I'm sure AI more generally is going to develop. Machine learning is getting better. And so I see, especially from the perspective of where I'm currently sitting, which is working with big data and turning big data into small data, which is useful for specific requirements that customers have. I can see how those tools can be really effective and become more effective in helping do things like analyzing large data sets for patterns, for anomalies, for things that human analysts on their own couldn't do. That kind of thing, I think, is where the real benefits lie. And I think though that the benefits really come from giving those tools closed data sets to use. So I think, just from the limited experience I have, I've not delved as much into this area as I'd like to. But from what I've seen, there's a lot of unknowns still even with like the LLM tools. Let's use that as an example. They are black boxes. We don't really know how they work. We don't know how they are providing us with answers to questions. And that's an issue, because if it gives us something that's wrong, we don't often know, okay, well, how did it get it wrong?
And it seems plausible, the answer.
They are very good at presenting plausible looking answers. Yeah. But I found even asking them to do very basic tasks like converting a set of coordinates from one format to another, sometimes they'll get it wrong. And so it's frustrating because
trust but verify.
Right, exactly. Yeah, trust but verify. I mean, that's the key to using these tools, is that you can use them and maybe it'll help speed up part of your process, but you've also then got to check what they provide you, which I think then introduces more of a delay. So,
right. And that's the dilemma, isn't it? You're saving time, but you still have to go and double check the work.
Exactly.
If it's important enough.
Yeah.
I see that some decision makers are using it and they are like, why should I wait for you for 2 hours or 3 days if I can get the answer in 3 seconds? And that's sort of the conundrum I want to figure out in my research. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that it comes down to trust ultimately for me, and I still don't quite trust these tools. I'll give you an example. I will ask an LLM to write me a report based on various different questions and for a particular audience. So I'll make sure I kind of craft the prompt in a way that it will be useful, and then it will give me a very plausible looking output. And then I'll ask it, okay, can you give me the sources you used for this? And that's always where the disappointment comes.
Yeah.
Because it will have used 1, maybe 2 sources. And I look at that and I think, oh, that's not proper research. I can't really use that. Is it a good start point? Maybe. Is it going to provide me with some useful keywords that I hadn't thought of I can use to search for information? Yeah, maybe. But then what I find disappointing with them is that they're not very good at going out and identifying unusual sources of information. That's where humans can be better. Humans can think outside the box more. These tools are very much thinking inside the box.
Yeah.
And we're better at sort of the lateral thinking that will help us understand that a question sometimes isn't what it seems, and actually just answering that question isn't that useful. What you want to do is go and provide an answer to a slightly different question, because that was going to be more helpful to the person who's asking it. And I think only by providing that kind of value, and that really comes through expertise, it comes through doing the work continually and maybe with a bit of experience as well. That's how you hopefully build trust from, say, a customer who comes to you or a senior stakeholder, whoever it is, decision maker, who might say to you, I've got this question. I can ask you, and I know it'll take you time to come back to me with an answer, or I can go to an AI tool, an LLM, whatever it might be, to give me an answer, and I'll get it quickly. I would hope that they would say, actually, I've already used this LLM tool, and it's given me this answer. What do you think? Is this right? Can you check it for me? Can you verify it? Or can you do something to give me a fuller answer, or something that I can actually work with? And hopefully then you as the analyst or the intelligence person can look at that and say, for the purposes you've got in mind right now, yeah, this is fine. Or actually, no, I have doubts about this. Let me go away and do something else for you.
Yeah. I usually see two things happening. One is that the LLM would either add something, I invent or hallucinate. It will remove something or forget and not include it, or it will combine something into something new. And those three things, you never know what happens. That's sort of the black box issue.
Yeah.
The other issue I see is people, they get an answer. And then if they ask the LLM, how did you get to the answer? What they think is, what the human think is that the LLM will then go back and look at what it did. No, what it does is generates statistically new words based on the prompt and the history it has. So it's not actually reverting and going back, yes, I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this.
Yeah.
It will generate an answer that is completely on its own, but based on the question, of course, and also a little history and memory that it has, but it's not going to tell you what it did and what it thought and how it reasoned. It'll explain in a new way how it would in a new way. So,
and I think with those tools as well, they're very much geared for speed. But in this context, speed isn't always what you want.
No.
Sometimes you want something to be more thorough.
Yeah.
And you almost don't mind if it's going to take an hour for it to produce something better.
Yeah. Oh, I agree.
But
I would rather it be right but slow rather than fast, and I'm never sure if it's right or not.
Yeah.
So that's my suggestion, or at least use for it. So how do you think this is going to go forward in the next 2-3 years? How do you think AI and LLMs or whatever of those you choose, how do you think that will change how we do intelligence?
How we do intelligence. I start to think these tools will become more and more embedded within, all these capabilities will become more embedded in some of the common tools and software platforms that everybody's using. We see it already with stuff like Microsoft and
a ton of vendors
Copilot, and there's lots of others, exactly, that are similar. So AI assistance is where I see a lot of this filtering through into intelligence work. I think the problem is going to be this is where you're going to start to see more of a divergence between government and private sector. I think a lot of these capabilities are easier to adopt in the private sector. In government, not so much. Government agencies, for good reasons, don't like to have tools that are essentially black boxes and you don't understand how they work and where the information may be coming from or going to.
Or where it's going.
Exactly.
Or who knows what you...
Exactly.
The system,
So there's lots of issues there. They will probably have to end up building native equivalents of them that only work within their environments, with their data. And that could be potentially quite interesting because I think actually the benefits of AI capabilities will come when you ask, or when you task the tools to look at a closed set of data, so for a specific purpose, and so the tool as it becomes trained and as it becomes better at using that type of information, will hopefully become more useful in terms of the outputs it produces. Because I think asking AI tools to just generally use information that's all over the open web isn't that helpful, because there is a lot of rubbish on the open web, and an increasing amount of rubbish, an increasing amount of AI generated rubbish as well. So there's this kind of circular thing going on.
They call it goop. AI goop.
Right.
And I think it's really fitting for that name. I mean,
absolutely. And I think it's worsening the quality of information that's available to everybody generally, but in particular those tools. And I think because those tools will be from what we've seen so far, are less discerning in the information they use, my worry is that they could very quickly become less useful.
I agree.
So I'm still on the fence about them. Essentially, I don't know whether they're going to be useful for us. Do I see myself using one day to day regularly in the next couple of years to a very limited extent, maybe, but I still, maybe this is just natural arrogance, I still prefer my own work to the work of the AI tools I've tested. So I use AI for certain things, right? So if I know a lot about a subject, I can start, and then I can spar with the AI or LLM to help me think about things in a new way. And then I go back and I add my stuff and write what I want to write. And if I don't know anything about the subject, I might start with an LLM to ask questions in general, and then I go out and I search more detailed information where I know where I can find it. So it helps me get an overview or
like an easy ingestible this topic and understand the topic before I start diving deeper. It'll help me a little bit. So those are two examples. And from my limited understanding so far, and I'm going to research more about it, I think or hope, I'm not sure yet, or if it's thinking or hoping, that we will get what you just said. We will get unique AIs that are trained on a certain way of operating or thinking or with a certain data set, and it does that and only that.
Yeah.
There, I think it's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
So imagine your house you have, or your work, and you have multiple specifically trained AIs that are always updated on certain data sets. And you can have discussions with it, or you can talk to another AI that talks to all these specific AIs, like agents or whatever the new term would be. I think that's where we're headed. But then again, you know, we have to have the machines or the systems so quick that they can actually be trained in a financially stable way.
Yeah.
So you don't need a supercomputer. But then again, when we get the quantum computers, maybe that'll solve that problem. I don't know yet, but it's a future. I think it's really exciting to sort of look into.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know somebody I talk to every now and again. So, you know, somebody I know who in this field essentially of intelligence analysis and who works with structured techniques. Dr. Shai Hershkovitz, you may have come across him. So he was telling me about a tool that he's used for conducting ACH for analysis of competing hypotheses. So he said in that context it worked actually pretty well. So having a tool that's trained to do that, use that technique, and you know, within a sort of restricted context, almost does potentially have a lot of benefits. So
yeah, it's going to be interesting
running
to
some of these techniques, speeding up the process of using these techniques may mean that more people apply them, which could again be beneficial.
Yeah. And an interesting part, though, is using ACH is a way to externalize your thinking. I demonstrate to those around you how you are thinking.
Yeah.
How can AI do that? That's one question I have. And that is, when we do with ACH, it's usually about stuff that has happened or are ongoing, but not so much for the future. That's what we have foresight analysis for.
True.
Right? So, and then when we ask questions to the ACH about the future, it'll go bananas and have fun with it, but that's not the tool. That's not what it's meant for. We don't have the data for it. Right, so it has to be more creative, and then we have to have alternative, futures and alternative drivers and all of those things to create all these scenarios and indicators to track. So it is interesting. I also saw what Shay had done, and also he put it on LinkedIn for people to test, and I tested it. I'm like, I'm not convinced.
Really,
not the way I'm using it or how it's supposed to be used in terms of from the Pearson school person. I mean, and how that. It's supposed to be used, from 20 odd years in the CIA. I think they know what they're doing, right? So I'm trusting them in that case.
I mean, but it makes me think though that there are contexts like that where ultimately you could potentially train a tool to help people do the techniques that if they're daunted by them. So if they look at it and they think, this is going to take too long for me to do or for our team to do, if there's a tool that helps them do it, that is kind of that kind of assistant tool almost that doesn't do everything, but helps guide them through a process or whatever it might be, that could potentially be useful. Or like you were saying before, you could put the inputs into it, you could do the technique and then sort of ask the tool, okay, what else, how else could we consider this?
Yeah, how can we be spectacularly wrong here, right? For that, it would be perfect, right? And also for ACH, in generating ideas for alternative explanations to a problem set. Yeah. Perfect, right? But at the same time, what is the bias in the system? What is the training bias? Because if it has biases that we don't know about, are we then trusting it with the biases that we don't know about? And the whole point is to reduce the bias. So there is an interesting conundrum here that I need to talk to other people about in terms of how are we going to use these tools for the purpose it's supposed to be. And then perhaps the purpose should change, but then should we apply the human tools to the AI, or should we do other things to the AI so it has a way to work in its context, i.e. the AI way of working, not the human way of working? We're using ACH, for instance, to reduce, bias, but also cognitive dissonance and other stuff, right? So how the AI doesn't think that way. If we apply the same methodology to an AI that doesn't think like humans, so there is an interesting problem here. But that's something I would like to dive into later in my research. So before I forget, you talked about open source intelligence. Is it open source intelligence and open source information? Go. In the private sector, I mean.
In the private sector, so my way of characterizing the difference between people who are working with open source information versus open source intelligence, for it to be intelligence, you've got to have a specific question you're trying to answer, and you've got to produce an answer to that, and that is your intelligence, and it is based on open source information. I think too often people are talking about open source intelligence. They use that term to refer to essentially their research, the research of open source information that they've conducted and completed. And so that's really what they're focusing on. The other aspect to it as well, I always sort of think is important, is that if it's intelligence, for it to be intelligence, you've got to somehow not reveal your methods, not reveal to the people or the subjects of your research that you're doing that research.
That's the secret side of it.
Yeah. So for me, it's kind of like thinking about security. Online security is a big element to any kind of open source intelligence process, and I don't think that's always necessary though. I think a lot of people who are doing what they call open source intelligence, they don't need to call it that. It is just research and analysis using online information, and there's nothing wrong with calling it that. That is what it is. So, you pick your use case and you decide, okay, what the risks are. Do I need certain security measures in place? Great. That's more like, for me, what is intelligence. For me, it's only intelligence if the people you're researching don't know that you're researching them, essentially.
And also, I asked this question on LinkedIn, of course, and there's a lot of people I know who sort of threw themselves at this discussion. You'll
really get a lot of opinions on this, I'm sure.
A lot of opinions, and that's fine. That's what I wanted, right? Because in my mind, what makes something intelligence, right?
Yeah.
If I copy paste something from a Twitter feed in that time or X these days, and I give it to you because you asked me a question, to me, that's not intelligence. No. Although it's a question, I answered your question. There is no process, there is no added value, there's no analysis, it's just a copy paste.
Yeah.
And a ton of the things I see out there that is called open source intelligence, in quotes, is actually information. And sometimes even just data. And to me, it's not intelligence, right? No. But what makes something intelligence is really difficult to nail down.
Yeah.
What are the tick boxes? And and you have an opinion, I have an opinion, and the 30 other people who commented on my LinkedIn post all had opinions on this. And I couldn't find like a common thread. You know when you see it. I'm like, well, that's not an answer. I mean, is it just because you're called the GCHQ? Is it then intelligence? Or but in my case, I mean, I work with customs, I work with tax, different agencies across the, and not in the private sector, but they do intelligence. The finance sector does intelligence. But what makes it intelligence, and when does it switch from data to information to intelligence? That is an interesting thing that, I know I'm complicating this, but
no, I think
if we
but
call
I think
it
you're
intelligence, there has to be some standard that we have followed to make it intelligent.
Yeah, I think it's got to be more than collated information. It's got to be an answer to a question where you actually are required to produce. For me, the intelligence part of it is dealing with uncertainty. That's what intelligence is, really, because you never have a complete picture. You never have all of the information you want. So it's like, how do you provide an assessment to somebody or some insight to somebody to help them make a decision without having that certainty? And that, for me, is what the intelligence is all about. And it's down to the skill of the analyst to take the information, the data, etc., and produce that intelligence piece, the product, ultimately.
Yeah. I've heard others also say that, we don't deal with open source intelligence, we deal with publicly available information, PI, which is a new acronym to me. I've never heard it before, but that's interesting to me. So I'm going to look into that as well.
Oh, yeah, we use that one quite a lot. I think that's probably maybe more common in the US, but certainly here in the UK, we use that. Publicly available information is another way of saying open source information. The other one we use is commercially available information, which is stuff that you've got to pay for. And is more than just like a newspaper subscription. It's expensive.
Data. Like data sets and other stuff that's not easily available. You actually have to like a paywall or I get that. I get that. If throughout your years, people are probably giving you like advice, and some advice matters more than others. Where you thought, oh wow, that actually changed the trajectory to where I am today.
Wow, that's a
A
really
life-changing moment.
Yeah, that's a really big question. It's interesting. I think that the advice I've had and that's been given to me, over the years has probably been very context specific, and so it was really useful at the time. I think the advice that's kind of stuck with me though over the years, and this is going to sound almost quite flippant in some ways, it was from a guy I worked with many years ago who sort of could probably see that I was somebody who was prone to overthinking. And he would constantly just say to me, look, just get on it. Like, as in, just act, just do something.
Mm-hmm.
Don't spend too long thinking about it, because then the opportunity will be gone. Essentially was what I took from it. And it's probably the advice that stayed with me the longest, because it's been most relevant to me throughout my career, in the sense of, like I said, I can be prone to overthinking or having those doubts and those kind of thinking about the ifs and the buts, which is what intelligence analysts do.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're all slightly like that.
When we've gone through selection, they usually find highly neurotic people like us who overthink and guilty.
Yeah, exactly. So that's for me something I've always reminded myself of, in that, actually, no, sometimes you've just got to, it doesn't matter sometimes which decision you make, you've just got to make a decision and act and then deal with it, rather than waiting and missing the opportunity.
Answer, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I had the same problems.
Yeah. So that's kind of, it sounds kind of strange and a little bit simplistic, but that's kind of stuff that stayed with me. Yeah.
Well, I think we're at the end. Is there anything, if you could ask me one question that you think either the guest would find interesting or you are curious about, what would that be?
Yeah, I guess it's about the future and where do you see in particular cyber threats going? And I know that's a big question, but given what we talked about a little bit earlier, the relationship between the geopolitical situation and cyber threats, how do you see that kind of playing out with the kind of current capabilities that both state and non-state actors have?
Oh, in what sense? In influencing us or influencing like finance sector or
whether it's but I guess particularly the finance sector, because that strikes me as being a good example of something which is critical to everyday life.
What we say, like, they're regulated, heavily regulated in terms of securities and safety, and they have to, right? If they don't, they lose their license and they can't operate. That's at least how it works in Northern Europe.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. Really appreciate our conversation.
Thanks for inviting me.
Could have, continued for hours.
I feel like, we could talk about these themes for a long time.
So, luckily for everyone that we had a time limit of 1 hour-ish, and we'll see what we can end up with when we cut the episode. So thank you again for coming.
Thanks, Freddie. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah.